Hey everyone, welcome back to Data and Donuts. My name's Aaron. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Aaron Voelcker. Today we're going to talk about integrated planning and the different aspects of how institutions can be more effective and successful with the work they're doing. But before we get into that, I would like Aaron to introduce himself and just tell us a little bit about himself. Go ahead, Aaron.
Hi, I'm Aaron Voelcker. I'm the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, Library, and Learning Support Services at Santiago Canyon College. I've been working in higher ed since 2006. I started as a research analyst at Antelope Valley College. I gained some knowledge in outcomes assessments during my time at Antelope Valley College, and ended up at Santiago Canyon College as the Assistant Dean of Institutional Effectiveness and Assessment in 2012. Shortly thereafter, 2014, I became the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, Library, and Learning Support Services. So I, maintained my role as primary researcher for the college, overseeing the college planning and outcomes assessment processes, but also picked up, managing the college's library, distance education, our instructional design center, and also this past year, as we're going through our self-evaluation, I'm also the college's accreditation liaison officer. It's been really interesting. Researchers they tend to be called upon often, and the expectation is that we know a little bit about everything. And I think my role now kind of reflects that a bit, because I'm in the academic side, I'm in the service side, and then obviously institutional effectiveness, integrated planning, program review, outcomes assessment, research.
Excellent. And that diverse perspective really lends itself to our conversation and probably helps you build on your expertise as you collaborate with a variety of constituents and plans across the institution, which leads into our first question. How does integrated planning and resource allocation work together?
Well, I mean, we do planning all the time. Our different initiatives, they're kind of mini plans compared to, let's say, an educational master plan, right? We've got our strong workforce program plans. We've got equity. And I could go on, the numerous initiatives that we have. Those are they're planning, but it's not necessarily integrated planning where you're looking college wide, right? So integrated planning takes a look at what are the institution's needs and what are all of the moving parts, whether it's technology, facilities, any other types of human capital, any other types of resources. What information do you have? What projects do you have going on? What are your college's goals? And then how does that drive how you plan for the future? And so integrated planning is taking all of those smaller plans and pulling them together so that you can ensure that your college is moving in the same direction, that you don't have these offshoots of other plans that are pulling and tugging in different directions, right? So, and this is a big thing for accreditation. Standard one in its entirety, right? Planning starts with the mission, and the mission should drive everything that you do. And then you get into, institutional effectiveness and all of the components that feed into integrated planning, whether it's outcomes assessment, data driving planning, program review, driving planning, student achievement data driving planning, and what are the challenges that are faced or that the institution faces when we try to tackle some of these initiatives. How does all of that information drive the college forward so that you're not spending funds in resource allocation unnecessarily or towards activities and initiatives that aren't aligned with the college's goals and priorities?
Oh, excellent. And I really like how you touched on how it all really works together. And it's blended, and in an effective institution, we see that complementary and really working to achieve that institutional goals and meet that mission. And so, which goes into my second question. As we start going through resource allocation, typically it's an annual process for many institutions where they allocate or different parts of the budget or resources, human capital and the like, to meet these initiatives, goals, and more or less the mission. And with that said, how have you seen institutions? We've seen them using rubrics, as a grading criteria or something like that. And so, what's the pros and cons of saying like using a rubric to help prioritize some of your resources?
Well, that's kind of a tough one to answer, to be honest, because I think it depends on the institutional culture. For Santiago Canyon College, we do use a weighted rubric to prioritize resource requests. You're absolutely right. It's an annual process. I am the administrative co-chair of our Planning and Institutional Effectiveness Committee, which handles the resource allocation process. We've got a resource request form, which is aligned with the rubric that we use to evaluate all of the resource requests that come forward. I'm a proponent of weighted rubrics because if you have an equal weight assigned to each of the components of your rubric, which is, again, drawn from the resource request form, the equal weight might work every year, okay. But there may be things that are more important to the institution in any given year. For example, maybe there wasn't funds available for technology in prior years. And so let's say this year, now we've got funds for technology, and it's very specific and limited to technology. Case in point, higher education emergency relief funds, right? And so if you have a weighted rubric, you can't give more weight to those things that have been waiting for a while to receive funds. I mean, you can, but it's a little bit more complicated, and you ultimately have to come up with some sort of justification as to why. So in our process, through our Planning and Institutional Effectiveness Committee, we have a conversation early on in the year as departments and units are submitting their resource requests to determine what are our priorities for this year. And then we rank our priorities using our rubric as a guide, and the highest priorities, depending on the budget category, get a higher weight. So that we can ensure the funds that are available in any given year are being allocated in a way that it's addressing the needs. And our Planning and Institutional Effectiveness Committee, I may be getting into another question here, but it's comprised of all of our governance committees have an administrative and a faculty co-chair. On our PI committee, we have the faculty co-chairs of all of our governance committees. So you've got this broad perspective from all the different areas of the college, whether it's related to budget, technology, distance learning, you name it, whatever we have a committee for, we've got representation there. And so when we weight our rubric, we've got buy-in as a college. And I think that's really important to have institutional buy-in in your processes, because if it's viewed as top down, the results may not be well received at the end of the year once all of those requests go through the process, right?
Most definitely, for sure. And so, because we're friends, I can talk about the other side of this, of what challenges do come up with the weighted rubrics. And similar to what you pointed out, is they can't account for certain things. Others learn how to game the system, so dependent upon how your rubrics put together, everyone gets a perfect score, right? Everybody checks the box. I got data, I got SLOs, I got all the things. But we use the same exact thing for years. And really adding a lot of the conversations at similar to what you've done in different committees can really help with those rubrics and sort through and help identify those priorities you alluded to, and really looking at how you can make subjectivity also a part of the numeric assessment of the rubric and how it can be weighted, voted upon, and the like. I've seen it at a variety of institutions. There's great ones like yours that use really good rubrics. I've stolen a lot of stuff from Aaron and the stuff he's done to apply to what we've used. And so definitely just taking those things into account when building those rubrics and really trying to bring structure to a process that is typically very unstructured, like who can yell the loudest in the room is unstructured. And so thanks for sharing that. And so
what something you, sorry to interrupt, something you
Go.
said actually reminded me early on in our process. We use our resource request process to address like safety needs as well. So a part of our resource request form was a question as to whether the requested resource will address a safety concern or a safety need. And we gave that component a really high weight, right? Because we wanted those things to rise to the top when we prioritize, so we could address those right away. Because there's concerns, right, and potential liability associated with that. Guess which year we had the most resource requests that were addressing a safety need, right? So you had mentioned gaming the system, and I don't know if I'd call it gaming, maybe so, but working within the parameters that are set for the departments and the units. And if they could in some way draw the line from their resource request to addressing a safety need, they did. And so it was a bit of a challenge for the committee to kind of wade through the narrative, and is this really addressing a safety need? Similarly for, we have another question, is this addressing a legal requirement, right? And so whether something is quote unquote legal or not is another issue. And so it puts the onus on the committee members to actually really evaluate each of those resource requests. Another thing I wanted to mention about weighted rubrics. We at SCC give a high weight to unit ranking, right? So there's several stops in the process. A unit generates a resource request. They rank all of the resource requests within their department. That then goes up to the division. The division chairs collectively meet and rank all of the resource requests within their division. And then that whole list from all the divisions goes to the corresponding vice president, who then goes through and re-ranks. And so early on in our process, we ran into some situations where some resource requests were conditional on approval of another resource request, right? Like, we need these three things, but if we don't get thing one, we don't really need thing two and thing three. But when we didn't give unit weight, sometimes the number three item outranked the number one and the number two item. And so to fix that, we gave a high weight for unit ranking. But now what we're facing is that after the committee, our planning committee goes through the ranking process using our weighted rubric, we don't see a lot of movement in the list of prioritized requests, right? There's not really anything jumping the line, going from like an item 5 to an item 1 or what have you. And so now the question from our committee is, well, why are we doing this then? Why don't we just have the units, the divisions, the VPs rank everything? Because what we do in our committee has very minimal impact. To which I reply, we as a committee have a much broader view of things, and we can look at all of the requests holistically and make a determination as to whether things need to jump the line. or to better serve the mission or to better address our institutional priorities, maybe item 12 should be item 1. And it could have been had we not used a weighted rubric, right? So to solve that issue, once the committee ranks, we submit our prioritized list to our budget committee, who then reviews every single item to see if there are available funds. When that list comes back to our planning and institutional effectiveness committee, we have a conversation about the resource requests. And that is an opportunity to make adjustments within the committee to the ranked list without accounting for the points associated, right? Like if there's something that's been on, it's been in the process for 5 years, it's, top 3 always, but still can't get funded. We have a choice. We can bump that up to the top of the list, or we can leave it wherever it was ranked. So this is a long way of saying, yes, there are pros and cons to it. And anytime you introduce something new, it is going to create more challenges that you'll have to grapple with. For us right now, it's how do we address that unit ranking issue without giving the perception to college constituents that the PI committee gets to decide everything. Because no, we want to honor the information that's come forward, but also we have a responsibility to address the mission, our goals, accreditation standards, and you name it. So we have some flexibility in making adjustments there.
I think you bring a great perspective forward about having that holistic, broad perspective of an institution for the PI committee, really sharing that for the college, because sometimes you may see from a unit level, this thing's number 1, like, oh my God, we need this. And it's like number 50, on the list. And so based on the realities of what's occurring across all the units, and it's not bad, it's just the reality, it may not be the top rank of the institution. And it's really giving that authority to VPs and the committee to have those discussions and decisions about is this truly safety? And then also at the unitary level, that's a really great place for them to discuss and prioritize, like what's our top 3, what's our top 5, what are the top things that would make the most impact, and then looking at the data. But before we get to those points, and you mentioned your PI committee a few times, what planning committee characteristics are essential to ensure effective resource allocation?
You have to have members that are knowledgeable about institutional processes and requirements, right? That to me is essential. You have to have folks that are trusted or have been entrusted with this type of responsibility. And the way that we do that at Santiago Canyon College is, as I mentioned before, all of the faculty co-chairs from our other governance committees serve on as members of our planning and institutional effectiveness committee. Our curriculum chair, enrollment management, educational master planning committee, budget committee, technology, distance ed, you name it. And so you need folks that are very knowledgeable and can represent each of those areas and objectives of the college, so that you have broad perspective on the planning process. For us, we also need folks that have at least some technical aptitude as well. Navigating whether it's Microsoft Teams or Excel files or PDF forms or what have you. We've had committee members in the past that was a challenge for them, and it became a challenge for the committee as well, and sometimes delaying processes. I think a broad knowledge of accreditation across the board is crucial. That helps prevent, kind of repetitive conversations around, well, why do we need to ask whether this resource request will support the mission? Well, it's a requirement. We have to demonstrate that mission drives planning and resource allocation, as do our institutional goals. And so we try to educate our new committee members about the requirements placed upon institutions as it's related to resource allocation, integrated planning, and so forth. It's really helpful for committee members to have some experience with program review and annual planning processes, because those documents and those processes drive integrated planning and resource allocation. And so committee members that have never gone through program review or even participated in program review sometimes get lost in our process and our conversations as well. I think if there's any other characteristics, and it's great to have folks that are collegial, right? They can have professional dialogue without getting angry. Resource allocation used to be a hot topic, or I should say a hot button for SCC. Anytime you've got limited resources and you've got 100+ resource requests that come through, there's going to be some lively conversation about what's a priority and what is not a priority. I think we've been fortunate enough at Santiago Canyon College to have members on our committee that are willing to have difficult conversations, but also have those conversations in a professional manner. Because I've seen those conversations go awry in my early years here before we had a formal process. And that's not good for anybody, especially the institution and the students that ultimately will benefit from the resources that are allocated.
I completely agree, and especially having that's a key thing you mentioned and peppered throughout our entire conversation today was really about the culture. And, do you create that environment that's willing and able to have the conversations, as you mentioned, and be able to make a decision and move forward with that decision, and then evaluate that decision over time. So that's really cool. And so as we move forward, I have two final questions. So the first one is, I've heard the terminology data said 1,000 different ways now. Data, all different ways. There's no wrong way to say it, apparently. So how do you say it?
Data and datum for singular.
Correct. Excellent. And so moving to the final question, what's your favorite donut?
Apple fritter.
I've heard a lot of that, actually. Apple fritters. I'll remember that.
It's a donut with fruit in it. How could you go wrong?
There you go. It's like almost like a pie and a donut blended.
Yeah, there you go.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for today, for hanging out, for chatting, giving us some insight on resource allocation, integrated planning, and just the different approaches being used. I look forward to seeing you again on this show, and we'll talk later. So thank you, everybody, for watching, and please hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you again later.
All right. Thanks for having me, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Thanks.